Hello and welcome to this episode of T-Tech. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Pi-hole software. So what Pi-hole does is it allows you to take any computer you may have and turn it into a fully fledged DNS server and essentially be able to control how DNS is handled in your network. So where does this come into play? Well, essentially, if you're starting right now with just a normal Wi-Fi router, and this also applies to router modem combos that you have in a lot of ISPs, what it's doing right now is actually many functions. It is doing some IP forwarding. It's also doing some NAT and SPI, so stateful packet inspection, otherwise known as firewalling. It is, in addition, doing DNS and doing DHCP. So DNS and DHCP are just two server programs that run on the Wi-Fi router. So what we're going to do when we use Pi-hole is take one or both of those functions, the DNS or the DHCP. So if you don't know, DHCP automatically gives the devices on your network IP addressing information. All right. Now, what DNS does is it takes those domain names like youtube.com or wikipedia.org and it turns those into their respective IP addresses. So that's what we're doing here, though. So we're essentially, once we hook this up, we're moving DHCP and DNS onto this Pi-hole machine. And as you can see, it's connected into our Ethernet switch, but it can also connect into the LAN ports of your router because those are just a switch as well. Now, you don't have to move both of these services. You can keep the DHCP server on your Wi-Fi router because in some cases you can't disable that service. And the DHCP server will also hand out DNS server information. So what you could do is if the DHCP was still on the Wi-Fi router, but the DNS moved to the Pi-hole machine, you can tell the DHCP server on our Wi-Fi router to tell all of these devices, whether they're wireless or wired, to talk to the Pi-hole server to get the IP address of domain names. All right? You can do that or have DHCP be on the Pi-hole as well. So that's what we're going to set up, though. So from there, though, we need to get ourselves an operating system to run on this machine. So we're going to do that next. But you can also run these on a Raspberry Pi machine as well. And I also want to add here, it's a good thing to illustrate. You can also move the last three of these functions onto something like an OpenBSD machine or a pfSense machine, and then you could use your Wi-Fi router. If we had another drawing here, the Wi-Fi router would be an access point only. So then that's an actual way to make the base of an enterprise network where you have the functions separated. But with that, though, we're going to go out and get our operating system first. And then once you have chosen the one you want and install that, you want to set a static IP on there because you don't want it to change. You can also set a DHCP reservation if you would rather do that. But if you want to do that, you'll know how to do that. But anyway, we're going to go out and do that. Then we're going to install Pi-hole on our new server. So I'll see you in a second. Alright, so for my Pi-hole server, I have it settled on Ubuntu. So I'm going to use this server version. You can use any version of Linux you want, though. You don't have to use the one I'm using, but if you want to follow along exactly, feel free to. So we're going to go to download, and I'm on ubuntu.com, by the way. And under Ubuntu server, we're just going to click Get Ubuntu Server. And then from there, you actually want to, let's see, scroll down. Manual. Option 2, manual server installation. And then once you do that, you'll get this, which gives you an ISO file. So then we're going to go ahead and download that and install our operating system. So you can put this on a DVD or a CD. I think only a DVD at this point in time. In 2021, it only fits on a DVD. But you can also just put it on a USB stick if you'd prefer. And a third option, you can just run it in a virtual machine. So you could have a server already like VMware ESXi. You could have a hypervisor like that. And you could run it there. But there are some options that aren't as intensive. I'll say intensive, I guess, for your hypervisor. There's ones that like VMware Player or VirtualBox that are easier to just install on like Windows or Linux. So any of those work, and it's very flexible because remember, this is just the software. As long as you have a computer that understands the code of the software, it will run. So you can run it whether it's a virtualized computer or you can run it whether it's real hardware. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to get that installed off camera, and once I do, we'll go on, take a quick look around, and then we're going to go over to pi-hole.net and go through the steps to get this installed. Alright, now I've installed Ubuntu Server, and at this point in time it's 20.04, the long-term support release. So we're going to go ahead and log into our server. And once we go ahead and log in, we can just take a look around our server if you want to, and just see that you may want to see the resources to make sure you have enough and things of that nature. But what you really want to make sure of is that you have a static IP address. And we do. In my case, it's 192.168.0.253. And you do want to make sure, unless you understand how to route between different networks and create different IP subnets, it's best to have the Pi-hole server on the same subnet as the rest of your devices. So the best way to figure this out is if you're on Windows right now, if you open up a command prompt and type ipconfig, ipconfig/all rather. So ipconfig, put a space there, and then do a / and then all. But what that will do is tell you your default gateway. And the default gateway is usually something like 192.168.1.1, but it's usually the first IP address that is on your LAN. So normally, as long as everything is defaults, as long as the server has the same first 3 sections in its IP address as your Wi-Fi router does, you should be fine. Alright, so when you're configuring this, look at that information and then put that in your server's configuration. So from here though, we're going to go out to pi-hole.net and get the software installed on our server. So I'll see you there. Alright, so now we're on pi-hole.net, and these are the developers of the Pi-hole software. So what options do we have here? Well, you have a lot of options actually. You can even run this as a Docker image. And it's out of the scope of this video's discussion, but basically it's a way to run it in its own little isolated area on your machine. Think of Docker sort of like a miniature version of virtualization. And if you understand virtualization, you know where I'm coming from. But that's essentially what Docker is. It's an interesting way to do it, but a much easier way to get started with, at least, is just the way I'm showing here. So let's click on supported operating systems. Just so you can see, you can use the Raspberry Pi, and that's the ARM CPU architecture. I'm using Ubuntu, and you can see if we look, 20.x is supported and 21.x. all the way back to 16.x. But if something isn't working in the future, if you're using this video, come here to the website, look at the version, and make sure you're using the right version of that operating system that they have built the installer script for. All right. Do keep in mind the CPU architectures too. Most likely, the system you may be using is one of those three, whether it's ARM, x86-64, or i386. i386 is falling out of favor, so it's either probably going to be ARM or x86-64. But make sure that is checked before you move on. Once you're good with that, though, you want to go up here to install, and wherever it moves in the future, find install. And this actually takes us to their GitHub, but this is my preferred method. This one-step automated install. All we're using is the curl command, and we're connecting with secure sockets layer to https://install.py-hole.net. And then once we grab that file, which is a bash script or program, we're taking the file as input, so instructions, and we're giving those instructions to bash. And then bash is going to run them. So from a security standpoint, though, it isn't a good idea to just grab instructions off the internet and blindly run them. I mean, think about this. If you're running as root when you do this on your server, the instructions, good or bad, have access to all parts of your system. Now, I've done this. I trust the developers of this, and it does work well, so it's okay to do it. But if you're not comfortable with that and you do want to read it first, you can manually download the installer right here, and before you run it as a separate step, you can review the code if you wish. But we're just going to use this automated command, so hop back onto your server, write the automated install down, or, do the second method there, and we'll get to installing it. Alright, so now on our server, now I did a sudo su, so the sudo command space and su to become root, but you can just put sudo before the curl command as well. But we're going to go ahead and hit enter on this. And it's very much automated. Again, as you can see, you have to be root to run this, so it does check. But this is where you got to be aware it's running root commands. It's essentially adding software to our server, and that was the security consequences of being aware of what you're running. But as it says, it's going to transform our server into a network-wide ad blocker. Essentially, it's DNS that does the ad blocking, because now we'll control if we want to answer those domain queries over DNS or not. That is actually what it means by ad blocking. We're just controlling the ad domains that are used to fetch the ads. But anyway, I'd encourage you to donate. It is a really good project. So go ahead and just click next, and yes there. So the Pi-hole is a server. It needs a static IP address, so make sure you've done that, and we have. And you do want to make sure it has all of that. It discusses the DHCP reservations, but we have done this and we did verify it. So we're going to say yes to this. Now, the upstream DNS provider is if the Pi-hole DNS server doesn't have an answer yet. It has to ask another server. Now, you can choose what you want. You can even have another server in your network, like maybe a Windows server or something else, and set it as a custom upstream. So you can control what the Pi-hole can actually resolve by changing the upstream parameter. Now, I'm not going to do that for this video. We're just going to say level 3. That's what I prefer. And this blacklist, we're just going to leave it as is. You can add more later. So we're just going to say tab there and hit OK. And we do want the web admin interface. That is the easy way to use this tool. And, that's part of it has awesome monitoring and stuff on it too. So you do want the interface, and we do want to install the web server and the PHP. Now, if you do have an existing web server, it may mess up whether you can access the existing one or not. So just install this on a server that isn't being used for anything else. We do want to log queries. There could be some cases for the privacy of your users. You may not want to know that, what resources they're accessing, but we're going to leave it on. That's the recommended setting. Now, we do want to show everything. Again, you can use other modes, but you can tweak that later as well. But regardless, if you're doing this for a business, anything that may have sensitive information, sensitive clients, that may be an issue to go ahead and log everything. It just depends. For a home network, I'm not concerned about that. So we're just going to log everything as we did. So it is quite a lengthy process here. I mean, it has to install a backend database along with the web server, the PHP, the DNS server, and the DHCP server. There's lots of software being configured in the background here. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I will be with you in a few minutes. Alright, so now the Pi-hole server is complete. It's all installed for us. So we have our IPv4 address, and that should be the static. And do make sure it matches your existing LAN addresses. Again, unless you have a more complex configuration. Now though, do make sure you take note of the web interface. It's going to be your server's static IP address on port 80, and then you're going to put /admin in the URL bar. So you do have a password, and again, it's going to get changed, and this is just a test system anyway, but it does generate you a unique password, so take note of that. But from there, what we're going to do next is go into that IP address, /admin, and take a look around the interface. I'll see you in a second. Alright, one quick tip too. If you do forget that information, if you log into your server at a later time, like say a year goes by and maybe you forgot, you can go to etc pi-hole install.log, and this is just the output of that script for you. So you can see things about that and all of that. Alright, so anyway, that's just if you have issues with the installation and things, but let's go to that web interface now. Alright, a quick tip: if you forgot the password or you want to set it to a different value, as root on your server, on its console by the way, you want to use the pi-hole command with the switches -a and then space and then -p. And now we're going to change the password to one we're going to remember, actually. And then there you go, it's set correctly. Alright, let's go back to the web interface. Alright, so now we went to that IP address /admin, and then it took us to our web interface. So you already see I got 2 clients and 45 queries. And if we log in, now we can see more information like the total queries over the last day, the client activity over the last day, the breakdown of query types in DNS. So remember, in DNS we have quite a few record types for different types of information. So we have A records that are IPv4, and we got 28.9% of the queries are those. We have quad A records for IPv6, and we've started with authority records and pointer records. Now the upstream servers there is telling you if the Pi-hole doesn't know the answer to the query, it's going to access and send the query to the upstream server. So this is the cache being bigger than the upstreams is a good sign. The cache being larger on Pi-hole, on the DNS server on it, means it's going to answer directly from its own cache locally. So it's not going to waste time for its packets to go over the internet and reach the upstream DNS servers. So we have 62.5% of all queries to this server cached, answered from the cache, and otherwise it didn't know one of them, so it forwarded to level 3. That's what we picked in that step. If you had picked Google, you would see Google here and things of that nature. So there is much customizability to be had with this software. And again, you can go ahead and see the queries there. But there is lots of data. So if I open this up here and if I dig and then say specifically at the server, and if I say yahoo.com, I can get all of the answers for yahoo.com. But as well, I can go to the query log. And then you can see the types of queries happening, and that the status was okay, and you can actually blacklist queries in real time. I'm not going to do that because that's a legitimate domain, but there is my query for yahoo.com, and it got an A record answer, and it answered it by the upstream we configured. But the next time I was to query that, you see how it was much faster too, 0 milliseconds. You can see that it is cached that next time. So it's much faster to query it a second time because that domain that was previously asked for is now cached on our Pi-hole DNS server. So then it says status is okay, it retrieved it from the cache. So now that query for yahoo.com is a proportion of the cached forward destination. So for our upstreams. So with that though, that's a very basic look at Pi-hole. There is one more thing I do want to show you, and that is how to go ahead and turn this into a DHCP server as well. And while I'm at it also, we're going to look at the whitelist tab. This is where the domains you can add here, add to whitelist, that you never want to be blocked. You can do regular expressions to catch parts of domain names and things like that. If you go to blacklist, we can add lists here as well that we add in the query from the query log, things like that. And under settings, we can also disable the query log, flush our network table, restart our DNS resolver, and of course, flush our logs for the last day, power off our system, or restart our system. Now, if you are starting to use this, do bear in mind, if your DNS server goes down, you're still going to experience an interruption in network traffic, even though your Wi-Fi router is still running. So as you separate these functions, you have to make sure the different parts of your network are operating for it all to work together. So don't be confused if you restart this and then you're like, my Wi-Fi router is on, but I can't get out to the internet. Why is that? It's because a big function that your network needs is now on the Pi-hole server. But that's how you do this. And then under the DNS, you can enable custom upstreams like we did. Tell it to listen on other interfaces if you want. And then this is where you enable the DHCP server. You would just check this box, have your available range. You can set a domain name, a lease time, and your router. If you enable this, and I'm not going to enable this in this example, but when you do, make sure that info from ipconfig/all, you have to put the LAN IP address of your router, not the IP address of your Pi-hole, because your Pi-hole is not a router. So it's not going to forward packets like your Wi-Fi router does. All right? So you do want to make sure you set that correctly, because having an error in your DHCP server configuration is going to very quickly, not immediately, but it's going to start to take all your devices off your internet connection. It's going to stop them from working. So do make sure to put the correct LAN address of your router in there if you use this as a DHCP server. But you don't have to, though. We're just, right now, all I am using it for is for DNS. Another interesting section of Pi-hole that I use quite a bit is under local DNS and DNS records. Now, this is essentially what you're doing is overriding the normal domain name record for the IP address. So instead of going out to the upstream and getting the normal IP address of a domain, it is going to act as a full-fledged DNS server and send the clients the DNS reply. So we could say example.com is loopback. If we add that in, anytime you query then for example.com using the Pi-hole DNS server, you're going to get loopback because we have made our own DNS record, an A record, in the zone file of this DNS server. So that's how you can do that. But another reason to use this is, say I had example.com, but I have a server on the inside that I want to have a private IP, but I want the outside to stay the public IP so they can route to me. Well, I can put, for instance, like 0254. And if I add that instead, I can go ahead and see that now it's 0254. So you can very quickly and easily take full control of your network's DNS information with Pi-hole. So that is what I wanted to show you there. We're going to touch on one more thing that is important because it's going to touch on how we can add new blacklists into Pi-hole and how we can also take them out. Alright, so now from the dashboard of the Pi-hole, we're going to go to query log and say we want to block fonts.gstatic.com. Now do be careful when you're doing this, especially if you've set it up network wide, because different things will start to break because they need the assets from this domain. But we're going to click blacklist, hit close, then go to the blacklist tab, and fonts.gstatic.com is now going to start to be blacklisted. So then you would see that it's not going to be allowed. So if I go dig at 192.168, the server's IP, fonts.gstatic.com, and in this case it just resolves 0000, so nothing, or anyway all IPs. But that's how you blacklist it, and that's all we're doing when we blacklist something. And you can see I can make the queries blocked go up and keep going up as I keep sending this query we've blocked. So that's how it works. And then if you need to disable that, go to blacklist, click the delete, the red button there, and then if I try to resolve it, instead of the zeros, I actually get the shortcut name for the domain name and the A record of it, so the IP address of it. But with that though, that is a few things about Pi-hole and how we get it set up. So I do hope you enjoyed this and found it helpful. And I appreciate you for watching. And thank you. And as always, it's Tyler with T-Tech, and have a very nice day.